Welcome to our deep dive today.
Mhm.
We're venturing into the hidden operating system of the human mind today.
Is definitely a hidden system, yeah.
It really is. And our mission today is actually incredibly straightforward. We are giving you a shortcut to basically decoding yourself and, well, everyone around you.
Which is quite the promise.
Right. But to do this, we are synthesizing a massive stack of psychological research. I mean, we're pulling from cognitive behavioral studies, deep Nietzschean philosophy, modern clinical psychology on trauma.
There's a lot of behavioral analysis in there, too.
Oh, absolutely. Even criminal behavioral analysis. We've got brilliant insights from sources like Practical Psychology, ThinkSee, Psychology Simplified, Dr. Anna, and those really intense interrogations analyzed over at JCS Criminal Psychology.
It's an incredible mix of resources.
Yeah, it really is. So we're going to explore things like why learning a new word makes it suddenly appear literally everywhere you look.
Right, yeah.
Or why the absolute loudest person in the room is often the most terrified. And why you might be operating on a script that was written when you were like 7 years old.
It is a profound shift in perspective. I mean, once you learn the underlying mechanisms behind these behaviors, you simply cannot unsee them.
Wow.
You start looking at the world with a completely different lens.
I believe it. Because usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis or biology, there's this expectation of precision.
Right, exactly. Like a math problem.
Yeah, it's like engineering. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, you know, there it is, broken.
Objective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you step into the world of human behavior, of neurodevelopment and cognitive bias, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just useless.
Completely useless.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. But, before we can even begin to read the signs in other people, we have to look inward.
Oh, for sure.
We have to understand the mechanisms of how our own brains deceive us on a daily basis.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I was reading about this in the sources. Have you ever learned a new word or maybe bought a specific kind of car and suddenly you see that exact car literally everywhere on the highway?
Oh, constantly. Yes.
Right. It feels like the universe is playing some sort of elaborate trick on you.
Hmm.
But our sources point out this is actually a highly documented cognitive bias.
Yeah, the Bitter-Meinhof phenomenon.
Exactly. The Bitter-Meinhof phenomenon.
And the mechanism behind that phenomenon is purely biological. It basically comes down to a structure at the base of your brain called the reticular activating system.
The RAS.
Right, the RAS. Consider the sheer volume of data your environment is just constantly throwing at you. You are bombarded with billions of bits of sensory stimuli every single day.
Like just walking down the street, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The hum of the refrigerator, the color of every car you pass, the texture of your shirt against your skin.
It's overwhelming when you really think about it.
It is. And if your conscious mind tried to process all of that simultaneously, your brain would quite literally short circuit.
Oh, yeah.
So the RAS acts as the ultimate gatekeeper. It filters out the noise to ensure your survival.
Which means when you learn that new word or buy that new car, you're essentially handing your RAS a new set of instructions.
You really are.
You're telling the gatekeeper, hey, this specific piece of data is now relevant to my reality. So the gatekeeper stops filtering it out and starts highlighting it for you.
And what's fascinating here is how this demystifies concepts like the law of attraction.
Oh, right. I always thought that was a bit, mystical.
Exactly. Many people assume there's a mystical force at play, that focusing intensely on money just magically causes dollar bills to manifest in your life out of thin air.
Right, which sounds great, but...
But the reality is far more grounded. When you obsess over a goal like building wealth, you are forcefully reprogramming your RAS.
You're changing the filter.
Yes. You are training your biological filter to scan your environment for opportunities, networks, and resources that were honestly always sitting right in front of you.
Wow. But your brain was previously just discarding them as irrelevant noise.
Exactly. You're just changing the parameters of the filter.
And reading through the sources, it seems this filtering mechanism heavily relies on something called anchoring, too.
Oh, anchoring is huge. It dictates how we establish our baseline reality.
The gas price example of the material was just so relatable for this.
It's the perfect example.
Like, if you grew up in a town where gas was historically $2 a gallon, that $2 mark becomes your anchor.
Right. Like, it becomes your subconscious definition of what is fair and what is true.
So if you move to a new city and gas is $3.50, your brain registers that as an outrageous injustice. You're furious.
Because it's so far from your anchor.
But if you grew up where gas was $5, that same 350 feels like a miraculous bargain.
Because your perception of reality is entirely subjective to the anchor your brain locked onto. The objective truth, the $3.50, it doesn't even matter.
That is wild.
Only the distance from the anchor matters. And the physical consequences of this subjectivity are just staggering.
Yeah, let's talk about the physical side.
Yeah.
Because we are all familiar with the placebo effect.
Right, where a patient takes a sugar pill and experiences genuine healing because they just believe the pill works.
But our research highlights its deeply unsettling twin, the nocebo effect.
Yes. The dark side of the placebo effect.
This completely blew my mind.
Yeah.
If a doctor hands you a literal sugar pill with 0 active pharmacological ingredients,
Right, nothing in it at all.
but they tell you a common side effect of this medication is severe nausea, your biology will actually manifest that nausea.
It will. The expectation of harm literally alters your physical chemistry.
That is terrifying.
It is. Your brain believes the anchor it was given, the doctor's warning, and it signals your gut. It releases stress hormones and alters your digestive motility.
Just because it was told to.
Yes. Your biological filter creates genuine physical distress based on absolutely nothing but suggestion.
Unbelievable. So if our brains are constantly filtering reality just to conserve energy, that perfectly explains the 80-20 principle, right? Or the Pareto principle, which is mentioned in the sources.
It connects perfectly, yes.
I used to think of this as just a quirky business statistic, like it's just a math thing. But it's actually a direct consequence of how our brains allocate cognitive resources.
Because the principle states that roughly 80% of our results come from just 20% of our causes.
Right.
And it is a ubiquitous law of human behavior because of that very need to conserve energy.
So the brain's just being efficient.
Exactly. An unguided brain will naturally gravitate toward the smallest amount of input that yields the highest survival value.
Makes sense.
And we see this scale up into every aspect of life. 80% of a business's revenue is typically generated by 20% of its most loyal customers.
Right. Or like 80% of the information you retain comes from 20% of your most focused study habits.
Even in your personal life, 80% of your emotional support usually comes from just 20% of your social circle.
Okay, let me try an analogy here. If my RAS is essentially like a bouncer at the nightclub of my brain,
I love that.
right? What happens if I accidentally hand that bouncer the wrong VIP list? Like, what if my anchors are entirely rooted in negativity, or I'm focusing 80% of my emotional energy on the wrong 20% of the people in my life?
Well, the brutal truth is that your brain's evolutionary shortcuts, they do not care about your happiness.
Ouch.
Yeah. They only care about keeping you alive and managing information overload. The bouncer will happily let in misery if it thinks that misery is familiar and safe.
Wow. So familiar misery is better than unfamiliar joy to the brain.
Biologically speaking, yes. But we aren't helpless here. Our sources reference Stephen Covey's habit of being proactive, which is basically the antidote to this biological autopilot.
Right, because we can take control.
You have the capacity to step in, to consciously evaluate the anchors you've accepted, and explicitly instruct your RAS on what to look for. You have to actively write a new VIP list.
Okay, so for you listening right now, it is incredibly valuable to pause and ask yourself, what anchors are you currently using to judge your own success or your own happiness?
That's a great question to ask.
And what VIPs are you letting pass the bouncer in your mind? Because when we understand how intensely our internal reality is filtered and distorted just to help us survive.
It creates a perfect logical bridge to how and why we distort our external reality.
Right. Because we filter the world to protect ourselves. So it is only natural that we project a heavily filtered version of ourselves to protect us from the world.
We wear masks.
Yes, the mask. This is a massive theme in the Nietzschean philosophy we reviewed.
It's foundational.
The argument is that everyone wears a mask. But the crucial distinction here is that they don't do it out of malice or like a desire to be deceitful.
Right, they aren't just trying to trick people.
No. People wear masks because they are terrified. To survive in a complex social hierarchy, to avoid the evolutionary death sentence of being rejected by the tribe. People construct a heavily curated version of themselves that they hope will be accepted.
And to read people accurately, you have to stop looking at the mask itself.
Because it's fake.
Exactly. The mask is just a performance. You have to look for the tension when the performance becomes too heavy to maintain.
The cracks.
Yes. You are looking for the cracks in the facade.
And our sources highlight how silence and exaggeration are two of the most glaring cracks you can spot.
They really are.
Like when you ask someone a deeply personal question and they offer a remarkably short, rehearsed reply, or they just smoothly dodge the topic completely. That silence is deafening.
Silence in that context is literally the sound of a person desperately dodging vulnerability. It is the mask hardening.
Wow. And the flip side is equally revealing, right? Exaggeration.
Oh, absolutely. The individual who loudly and repeatedly proclaims, I absolutely do not care what anyone thinks about me.
They care so much.
They are broadcasting their insecurity. The ego turns up the volume to drown out the inner doubt.
That makes so much sense. And then we have the mask we use when evaluating other people. The contrast in our psychological sources here is fascinating.
Yes, there are two distinct forces at play here.
Right. On one side, we have the similarity attraction principle, which is this biological heuristic where we naturally like and trust people who are similar to us.
It's very primal.
The practical psychology material uses a great example for this. If you have a beard and a stranger with a beard asks you for a favor,
Statistically, you are far more likely to say yes.
which sounds ridiculous, but it's true.
It is true. The mechanism there is cognitive ease. The brain is lazy, and someone who looks or acts like you requires significantly less processing power to predict.
They feel safe.
Right. It establishes a baseline of tribal safety.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to examine the dark mirror of this principle.
Which is Nietzsche's concept of projection.
Exactly. What we vehemently hate and attack in others is almost always the exact trait we are hiding in ourselves.
I mean, think about
Yeah.
that. When someone constantly mocks arrogance in their colleagues, they're usually battling severe insecurity about their own self-worth.
Yes. Or when they become hyperfixated on someone else's dishonesty, they are frantically hiding a truth they haven't faced in their own life.
So judgment is almost never a factual assessment of the target. It is a confession about the internal state of the speaker.
That is exactly right. And we see this amplified on a macro scale with modern social media.
Oh, the endless look at me culture.
Right, the aggressively curated aesthetics. Nietzsche would view this not as a display of strength or abundance, but as a hollow whisper of need.
It's a cry for help almost.
It is the terror that if they stop performing, they will cease to be loved or remembered.
Okay, wait. Let me push back here for a second.
Sure.
Because if literally everyone is projecting their shadow selves and everyone is wearing a mask to survive the tribe, how in the world do we differentiate genuine earned confidence from someone who is just hiding deep guilt or overcompensating?
That's a vital question. It comes down to the presence of friction.
Friction.
Yes, real confidence does not need to perform. It does not feel compelled to compete or loudly announce its presence. It just is.
It's quiet.
Exactly. When you encounter chronic, exaggerated confidence or a person with a relentless, aggressive need to control every detail and dominate every conversation, you are witnessing a desperate attempt to manage inner chaos.
Oh, wow.
Criminal behavioral analysts observe this constantly.
Yeah, the breakdowns with the JCS channel are just chilling in this regard.
They really are. When analysts interrogate suspects displaying strong narcissistic traits, they note how incredibly rigid the suspect's mask is.
They just won't drop it.
They project absolute certainty, superiority, and control. But under the intense psychological pressure of the interrogation room, the mask splinters.
The cracks show.
Right. There is a specific analysis of a suspect named Sarah, who maintains such a thick mask of control that she completely detached from objective reality.
I remember this.
Even after confessing to a horrific crime, she genuinely believed she was going to go home later that evening.
It's mind-blowing.
Her mask had become a prison. To admit the reality of her situation would mean the total collapse of her ego, so her brain simply refused to process it.
That is just the ultimate tragic extreme of the mask overriding the person.
It really is.
Bringing that back down to everyday life for you, listening, the next time a coworker constantly interrupts you in a meeting or talks over your ideas, don't just react to the annoyance.
Right, look deeper.
Look at the crack in the mask.
Yeah.
Recognize that their behavior might not be arrogance at all. It's a frantic fear of being forgotten or deemed irrelevant.
And reframing it that way completely transforms your frustration into a deeper understanding of human mechanics.
Exactly. It changes everything.
This raises an important question, though. When you successfully spot that crack in the mask, when you see that underlying fear of being forgotten or rejected, what exactly are you looking at underneath?
Well, you aren't just seeing a quirky personality trait. You're looking at history.
You are almost always looking at an unhealed childhood wound.
Yeah.
Nietzsche argued that behavior is biography. Human beings rarely speak from a place of pure logic. They speak from their pain.
So true.
We construct our worldviews based on what traumatized or hurt us in our formative years, and then we use adult logic to build an intellectual shield around that vulnerable core.
We're just endlessly repeating the roles we were forced to play when we were defenseless.
Exactly.
The sources from Psychology Simplified dive really deep into the clinical mechanics of this, specifically looking at parentification.
Which is so common.
It is. This is the tragedy of the child who was always praised by adults for being, so mature for their age.
It is often framed as a compliment, but clinically, it is a trauma response.
Right. A parentified child was forced to take on adult, emotional, or physical responsibilities long before their brain was equipped to handle them.
They had to be the caretaker, the mediator, the responsible one.
And the result is devastating. They grow into adults who suffer from chronic emotional burnout, severe people-pleasing tendencies, and a relentless, crushing self-pressure.
Because their developing nervous system was hardwired to believe that love and safety are only earned by being endlessly useful and carrying the burdens of everyone around them.
That is so heavy. And Dr. Anna's clinical research adds another layer to how these early environments dictate our adult reality.
Yes, she does great work on this.
She explores why abusive or highly toxic dynamics in families are often so difficult to spot from the outside and incredibly hard for the victim to recognize themselves.
Because it happens gradually. The developing brain maps the world based on its immediate surroundings.
So whatever is around you is normal.
Right. If a child grows up in chaos, that toxicity becomes completely normalized within their nervous system. Chaos becomes the established baseline.
And that anchors them.
Exactly. So as adults, they subconsciously seek out romantic partners or toxic workplaces that recreate that identical chaos. Simply because peace feels unfamiliar, unpredictable, and therefore dangerous.
Wow. They're just running the old script on a loop.
Endlessly.
And you can see these underlying scripts most clearly in how people react to weakness or mistakes.
That is the ultimate litmus test of a person's unhealed wounds.
How so?
Observe how someone treats an individual who cannot fight back. If a manager punishes a subordinate's minor mistake with ruthless, disproportionate cruelty, that reaction has very little to do with business standards.
What's it about then?
It happens because when that manager was a child, they were never allowed to make a mistake without facing terror or a severe withdrawal of affection. They are projecting their own childhood rigidity onto the present moment.
That is, wow, it reveals itself in envy too.
Oh, absolutely.
The person who constantly attacks your ideas, gossips about your achievements, or tries to tear you down, they almost always envy you.
Envy is so revealing.
Our sources frame this beautifully. Envy is just unspoken desire. It is their soul saying, I want that level of freedom or that success, but my internal script tells me I am not allowed to have it.
And because they cannot have it, their only recourse is to try and destroy it in you.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me and honestly a little heartbreaking.
Yeah.
When you strip away the corporate jargon, the expensive clothes, and the social status, so many explosive adult arguments are fundamentally just two terrified 7-year-olds yelling at each other in business suits.
That is a brilliant image.
Right, just desperately trying to protect themselves from a threat that hasn't existed for decades.
Which brings us to the ultimate purpose of this knowledge.
Right, why learn to decode the world this way?
Because reading people is not about gaining tactical power over them.
No.
It is not a psychological party trick to gain leverage in a negotiation or manipulate a relationship. It is a profound responsibility. It is about offering grace.
Offering grace, I love that.
When you can look at the arrogant bully or the micromanaging boss or the chronically defensive partner, and you can clearly see the terrified, parentified child hiding behind their heavy armor, you stop reacting to the armor.
You see through it.
You stop internalizing their attacks. And when you stop taking their projections personally, you become entirely unshakable.
So for you, listening right now, try to apply this immediately today. Think about the person who frustrates you the most in your daily life.
We all have one.
The one who consistently gets under your skin and just ruins your mood. The next time you interact with them, instead of asking, why are they doing this to me?
Change the framework.
Exactly. Ask yourself, what are they so afraid of losing? Watch how rapidly the dynamic shifts.
It changes the entire architecture of the relationship.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started by examining the biological bouncers in our brains.
The reticular activating system and our subconscious anchors.
Right. The filters that aggressively manage our internal reality to prevent cognitive overload. Then we moved outward, exploring the social masks we construct to survive in the external world.
Hiding our deepest fears behind silence, exaggeration, and projection.
And finally, we looked behind the curtain of the masks, uncovering the unhealed childhood scripts and nervous system wiring that, well, pull the strings of our most perplexing adult behaviors.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but you now possess a highly effective toolkit. You aren't forced to just react to the chaotic surface level of the world anymore.
No, you're looking at the mechanics.
You are reading the underlying code of human behavior.
But before we leave you today, there is one final lingering thread to pull. A concept to explore on your own.
Oh, I know exactly where you're taking this.
If our conscious thoughts are merely programming our biological filters,
Right.
then our social personas are simply masks we wear to survive the tribe,
Yeah.
and our daily behaviors, reactions, and arguments are nothing more than rehearsals of scripts written when we were helpless children.
Then who is the real you observing all of this?
Exactly.
If you successfully drop the mask, clear out the subjective anchors, and completely heal the childhood wound, what is actually left underneath?
It is the ultimate question of human existence.
We'll leave you to chew on that one.
Yeah.
Keep looking past the masks, keep questioning the filters, and keep digging deeper into the mechanics of the mind. We'll see you next time.